Now we get into the standard C function library properly. We start with two functions. Both have to do with exiting a program. There's a function called exit that is simply used to exit the program from any point in the code. At the moment, the only way that we can ever exit a program is by reaching the end of the main function or by prematurely issuing a return statement inside the main function. But what if you need to exit the program from some other point? We've already seen an example of this when we were using the malloc routine, and malloc gave us back some kind of error message, or it gave us back a null saying there was no more memory. You clearly don't want to continue with the program at that point, and so you exit. Now we saw that, and we saw that exit also took a single parameter, which was an integer. We typically gave it a 0 or a 1. And this is the exit status that we talked about just a moment ago, the value that main returns. Remember, main's return value is a 0 or a 1 or a 2 or something like that. Again, if you want to exit the program from anywhere else apart from main, then you pass that return value, that 0 or 1, as a parameter to the exit program, like so. So you might simply call it exit brackets 0, close brackets, semicolon. That would be a typical call to exit. Now, in conjunction with the exit program, there's something of an advanced feature that you can use. Most people don't know about this. It's called @exit. There's a function called @exit. It takes a single parameter, which is the name of a function. Now, you've never seen this before. You've never seen parameters that are actually the names of other functions. Those are called function pointers, and we're going to discuss those in a later chapter. We'll discuss them properly. We'll have a little bit brief preview of function pointers here. Anyway, when you pass a function pointer to @exit, in other words, if you just pass the name of a function to @exit, it registers that function as a function to be called automatically whenever the program exits. It doesn't matter which way the program exits. It can either exit using the exit function, or it can exit when main ends. Either way, the function that you specify to @exit will be called. It looks like this. You might, for instance, be using a database program, and at the beginning of the program you log on to the database, and there may be 25 different instances scattered all throughout the program where you call the function exit because something's gone wrong or whatever. It's just time for the program to exit at that point. Now, what you don't really want to have to do is remember to call the logoff database function at every single point, at each of those 25 instances. So, there's a more convenient way of doing it. You can simply pass the logoff database function in to @exit and say, whenever you exit the program, do this. In other words, do this, log off the database. And no matter how the program exits, you will always log off the database. You can call @exit multiple times. You can pass it 10 different functions. You can pass it at least, I think the specification is you can pass it at least 32 functions if you want to. And those functions that you pass it will be called in the reverse order to that which you registered them. In other words, the very first call to @exit, if it was logoff database, then logoff database will be the very last thing that happens when the program finishes. So it will kind of back its way out. Now that might sound odd to do the first things last, but I've used @exit many, many times, and I've found that that is the most logical way of doing it. Okay, we're going to see some examples of that. Let's go and have a look at that now. This is the @exit program. I'm going to use it to demonstrate the @exit function. So let's have a look. Let's go down and have a look at main. Very simple. We log on to the database, we do a bunch of things, we log off the database, and of course these say goodbye. Now what's the say goodbye? That's, remember that? The old flush and get char that I always want to have at the end of the program. I've always been putting it there. You guys might not have needed to, but I've needed to. It just waits for me to press enter. But now I'm actually going to prompt them to press enter. So that'll be how I say goodbye. So that'll be the last thing I do, is I just prompt them to press enter, and then I read a character from the keyboard. And that's going to be how I do that. Now I want that to happen no matter how I exit the program. Even if we exit abnormally, I still want that to happen. So let's have a look at logging on and logging off the database. We're obviously just going to simulate that. We're logging on to the database here, and we're logging off the database here. And then we say goodbye. Now, process things is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to ask for a number from the keyboard, and if that number is greater than 10, I'm going to exit the system. I'm going to give them an error message that they can't enter numbers bigger than 10, and exit the system because it's some kind of error. Now, notice that if I exit the system, I still need to log off the database because the very first thing I did was I logged onto the database. So I need to log off the database, and then I need to say goodbye, and then I need to exit. Now, there's only two things to remember here, logging off the database and saying goodbye, but there can quite often be a good half a dozen or a dozen. And if there are that many, it's hard to keep track of how many you're currently up to. How many times have we logged onto the database at this point? I can't remember. Have we initialized the menuing system? I can't remember, and so on. So the much easier way to approach this is to simply call the @exit function. So the very first thing when we log onto when we start main is to say @exit, say goodbye. And then we don't need to do that. We don't need to call it there, and we don't need to call it there either, because every time the program is exited, either that way or that way, oh look, we've got a return 0 in our main now. It doesn't matter how the program returns. Even if we didn't have the return there, it would still return, main would still return. What value would it return to its calling environment? Well, it would just return a random number. You have no way of controlling it because you haven't specified it. Anyway, no matter which way we exit the system, it's going to say goodbye because I've told it to. Now, when I log onto the database, I want to set things up such that it will automatically log off the database. So what I need is a line similar to this. I'll do a little copy of that. So when we log onto the database, the very first thing I need to do is set up the fact that when the program exits, I want to log off the database. Now that doesn't actually call the logoff database function to get run at that particular time. Not right then. It sets it up such that if the program ever exits, then we will automatically call this program. So now we don't need to have this line of code. And we also don't need to have this line of code. So all our program is now really doing is logging onto the database and processing things. That's what the program does. And whenever the program exits, two things will happen. It will log off the database and it will say goodbye. In which order? Well, that's up to us to find out. Let's see if we can run that now and find out. By the way, we need stdlib.h in order to use @exit. stdlib.h. Let's give that a go. Compile and run. We're now logged onto the database. Excellent. So theoretically we should automatically log off at some point. Please enter a number. Now let's not enter a number that doesn't cause the program to abnormally exit. Continuing normally, and we automatically get logged off the database, and it runs the goodbye function last of all. It runs the goodbye function last of all because it was the very first thing that I passed into @exit. Let's run the function again, run the program again, and this time we'll enter a big number. The number is too big, exiting, and still we get logged off the database, and still the goodbye function gets run. So that's a very handy little thing to use, that @exit routine. I hope this sample function demonstrates that properly for you.